Welcome to our program, Data Breach. It Can Happen to You, brought to you by the Cooperative of American Physicians and CAP's Practice Management Services Committee. The information in this presentation should not be considered legal advice applicable to a specific situation. Legal guidance for the individual matters should be obtained from a retained attorney. And with that said, it's my pleasure at this time to introduce today's speakers. Melvin Osswald is the Vice President of Program Underwriting at NAS Insurance. She joined NAS in 2002 and specializes in healthcare, cyber liability, employment practice, and directors and officers coverage. Ms. Osswald currently supports NAS's reinsurance programs and oversees the underwriting and product development of billing errors and omissions, cyber liability, employment practices liability, and directors and officers programs created to address the new exposures facing healthcare providers. Melvin has been a featured guest speaker at various industry conferences addressing the evolving professional liability risks in healthcare and has served on the steering committee of the Southern California chapter of the Professional Liability Underwriting Society. Also on our faculty today is Chris Reese, the Vice President and Director of Underwriting at NAS Insurance. As part of NAS's key management team, Ms. Reese provides insurance solutions for clients in the healthcare industry. She has held leadership positions in both the underwriting and retail broker sides of the business and has worked in the London market for a reinsurance intermediary. Ms. Reese has been involved with cyber risk insurance for the healthcare industry since 2004, providing coverage to physicians, medical groups, and integrated delivery systems. So we have a couple of terrific speakers for you today, and we'll begin today's presentation with Chris Reese. And Chris, welcome.
Thank you so much. First of all, I want to thank the Cooperative of American Physicians for inviting us here today to assist you. And I want to thank all the physicians and your practice management teams that are attending today. Melvin and I are going to present material that will give you sort of a high-level review of what's happening today as far as claims and statistics in the data breach environment. And we're also going to give you some very specific risk management techniques that you can use. And that really, I think, is the most important part of our presentation today, to give you data so that when you leave here today, you'll feel confident about being able to develop a plan. We always say that a data breach is not a disaster. Mishandling it is. You know, we see claims all the time, and gosh, you know, it ranges from what our claims department calls the baby mama drama, where, you know, there's a hospital employee or a clinic employee or a medical group employee that finds out that their ex-boyfriend's girlfriend is in the hospital or came in with a medical condition, and they start talking about it. You know, that's a claim. You know, to the other extreme where we see a laptop lost with a substantial amount of data on it. So we see all types of claims. And from our experience, there are really two things that are critical in the event of a claim. One is that you have a risk management process in place, and we're going to go through some details today. And the next is that you bring in resources immediately that have expertise to help mitigate the event from unraveling. You know, one of the beautiful things that CAP has done for their members is created this panel of experts for you already, so that in the event of a breach, you don't have to find the forensic folks. You know, the legal team is already established that understands the implications of both federal and state law. We've got forensic support. And we've got PR teams are also standing by to help craft the message. So the handling of the event, that part is taken care of as a CAP member and having the coverage that CAP provides. We're going to jump now to a little bit of an overview of what's happening with cyber threats in the United States. Everyone reads the news. You know, we've seen some pretty massive breaches. I'd like to read to you an announcement that was made public in July of this year. Russia launched a sophisticated cyber attack on the Pentagon's unclassified mail system used by the Joint Chiefs of Staff. NBC News reported that Russian sources were responsible for the sophisticated cyber intrusion, which was carried out around July 25th. The Pentagon took the unclassified system offline within 2 weeks, citing suspicious activity, and the hack affected approximately 4,000 military and civilian employees of the Joint Chiefs of Staff who use the system, including Chairman General Martin Dempsey. So we can see that at that level, the ingenuity of the hackers is far outstripping the defense that we have here in the United States. And there are really significant financial implications of this. There's reputational harm. And how do we fight against it? What can you do as an organization? Because, of course, in the healthcare industry today, you've got competing pressures. You've got to deal with your need for your technology to take you to the next level of connectivity with all the different parties you need to connect to, as well as deploy resources to help protect your perimeter. What can you do? That's what we're going to be discussing today. When we're looking at the economic motivation of the criminals, I'd like to give you some data that you might find interesting. Right now, on what's called the dark market, the value of health insurance information records is running at about $10 a record. We see that corporate trade secrets are also targeted at times for the healthcare industry. That could be information about clinical drug trials. And then, of course, your employee records could be targeted as well. That information can be used to create a false identity. So there are a number of fronts where the criminals are looking to get data. We look at the attacks, and at this time we see what we call high-end attacks. Those are categorized as really like advanced, persistent threats. So if you think about like a sonar ping and how that's going out and it's looking for a hard object on the other side, think in your mind about your perimeter defense for your network security, and think about cyber attacks coming in where there's constant pings of one sort or another that are looking for vulnerabilities. Particularly challenging at this time is they're looking to gain access through legitimate access that third-party vendors have. This has been a feature of intrusion over the past few years. Home Depot is an example of this, where they use the outside vendor system credentials to get in. And, what can you do? What can you do to deal with this? Well, we're going to jump into that. On the low end, first and foremost, let's deal with employees. We need employees to be properly trained. Employees that are HR issues can also be a threat for you on the cyber side because they have access to your patient's information. They could walk out of it with paper records. They could walk out of it in an electronic format. So employees are certainly a key first defense. Subcontractors and independent contractors, you've got to look at the contracts. Bring your own device policies. When you're looking at the different organizations that you're sharing information with and that your hospitals where your physicians are going into with a bring your own device need, you want to look closely at what their policies are and make sure you're in conformance with them. So this is our first question for the group. We'd like to know if your facility or group has experienced a cyber breach.
Let's go ahead and put that on your screen. And again, it's a simple yes or no question. And we'll have several of these questions for you throughout the presentation. And your participation is anonymous. So we invite you to click, has your facility or group experienced a cyber breach? Yes or no? Give it just a few more seconds, and then we will share the results with you. Again, a reminder, if you have a question, type it into the chat tab on the left side of your screen. But it looks like overwhelming results here. We'll close this and share the results with you. The answer, 94% say no, but the other 5%, 5 to 6% say yes, they have experienced a cyber breach.
Hello, everyone. This is Melvin Osswald, and I'll take the presentation from here, and then Chris and I will be back and forth on the presentation. I do want to review some of the cyber breaches that's hit the news. I'm sure all of you are familiar with some of these breaches, and this page lists some of the massive multi-million breaches. Target, of course, is not a surprise that's on this list. The Target breach involved 110 million credit card and debit card information, including PIN numbers that were stolen. And it was estimated as of January this year that they already accrued $252 million in expenses related to the data breach. Target faces further claims from the major credit card companies, and state and federal agencies, including the FTC and the SEC, are also investigating the breach and may seek to impose fines and penalties. This breach was actually happened in the holiday season of 2013, and I do the holiday shopping in my family, so I was unfortunately affected by the breach and received a notification letter. There are actually two large breaches on this list that were healthcare related, and that's Anthem Blue Cross and St. Joseph Health Systems. The Anthem discovered that hackers had broken into their database, and it turns out that the healthcare firm didn't encrypt a huge volume of their personal information they held. The breach involved close to 80 million members' information that was accessed. That's 1 in 4 Americans that were affected. In fact, my husband and also my 9-year-old son received notification notices about this breach. So now my whole family receives junk mail, including my 9-year-old son. This breach doesn't surprise me because of the valuable information that Anthem holds and stores, especially since there's close to 50 million or 15% of the U.S. population who are uninsured. The healthcare information of the thieves that the thieves stole are valuable in the black market, as Chris mentioned, and she'll also go through the black market into more detail in further slides. The St. Joseph is a healthcare delivery system. Hackers gained access to their server containing over 400,000 patient and employee records, and they actually had to shut down access to the server and hired IT experts and federal law enforcement to investigate the issue. It was discovered that the hackers were mainly from China, and they had to notify patients and offer them free year of identity theft protection services. And apparently, a thumb drive, and this was a huge breach, but the following year, they had a second incident at a different location where a thumb drive with information on X-ray patients went missing after a burglary in one of their locations. The hospital officials learned, unfortunately, that the drive was missing from the locker of a staff member, and who basically she backed up the X-ray records on the drive in preparation for a data migration of electronic medical record systems. So the drive contained over 33,000 patients' information, but even though they said it had no indication that any of the patients' information had been used in any unauthorized or improper manner, they still had to notify the affected parties and offered credit monitoring. And efforts to recover the missing drives still continue today. Here are a list of smaller breaches in 2013 and 2014, and majority of these are actually medical-related breaches. When looking at physicians' offices, the number of records does drop down significantly because they certainly won't have as many records like Target or Anthem or St. Joseph. However, we'll show you on a further slide that the average cost of a data breach costs about $20 per record. So if you're looking at the one doc office of Dr. Nisar Qureshi, which is the second from the bottom, where he had 20,000 records that were compromised, multiply that by $20 per record, the estimated cost for the data breach would be about $400,000.
What's that?
And if there's a lawsuit and fines and penalties, then the cost can dramatically increase from there. So let's step back a bit and quickly define cyber breach. It's an incident in which sensitive or confidential information has potentially been viewed, stolen, or used by unauthorized individuals. This could be intentional or unintentional. And when most people think of cyber breach, they automatically think of computers, electronics, or even websites. But a cyber breach includes paper format as well. Because remember, it's the information that's at risk, which could come in electronic as well as paper format. In the past, if criminals wanted to steal files, they would need to go to the actual location to steal files and load them in a truck. And nowadays, cyber criminals can steal information with a small thumb drive that can fit in their pocket. In fact, they don't even need to go to the actual location and risk being caught. They can access information in the comfort of their own home. The information is so easily available now because more and more information is being digitized. Here's some additional 2014 statistics. The ITRC reported 783 U.S. data breaches in 2014, which represented 27% increase over the number of breaches reported from 2013. Of those breaches, 42% were in the medical healthcare industries, and hacking incidents were reportedly the leading cause of data breach incidents, accounting for 29% of those breaches. This was followed for the second year in a row by breaches involving subcontractors or third parties at 15%. So it looks like we had our poll, so I want to share with you the results. It showed that 5% said that they have experienced a cyber breach, and 95% said they have not experienced a cyber breach. So this is an interesting stat. So the CAP members are definitely educating themselves with the cybersecurity, which is great to see. And as you can imagine, we now have pages and pages of statistics that's available. But few points that's important as a takeaway is, one, you can expect the number of cyber breaches to continue rising because network threats are more frequent and getting worse in severity. And two, identity theft is among the fastest growing white-collar crime in the United States, and it's been a number one complaint lodged in the past few years with the FTC. In fact, at a recent advising conference, we had a panel of experts that included underwriters as well as an FBI agent that discussed cyber liability and what they're seeing. And the FBI said that there's about 30,000 sites that's hacked daily. And as far as the FBI is concerned, their top three priorities is 1, terrorism, 2, counterintelligence, and 3, cybercrime. So if it's on the top 3 list of the FBI, you can be sure this is something that needs to be taken seriously. And I think we have an update, and then we have the next question or poll question here.
Okay, and folks have voted on, are data breaches more likely to be caused by a hacker or malware viruses penetrating the cyber defense? And it's about a 2-to-1 margin. Let's share those results. And we can say that 33%, or about a third of the audience, says hacker. 66% say malware or virus. And your thoughts on that?
Well, it's interesting. I think it really reflects what we're seeing on a day-to-day basis. You know, if you're sitting in the medical group office, the data up in front of you now shows that a very significant amount of the attacks are hacker attacks. This data reflects the percentage of records exposed. So the malware virus are the frequent pings that we see hitting the perimeter defense system. But when we look at the actual event that's going to impact the largest number of records, that's going to be an event that's done by a hacker, and usually it's going to be targeted. There's a difference between targeted and untargeted cyber threats, and malware and virus events are frequently not targeted. So my mother could inadvertently write an email with a virus, and then all of a sudden it's impacted everyone that's in her Outlook, and that's not targeted. When a hacker wants the information, they're going to spend the time, and they may spend, a few years exploring the vulnerabilities and looking for different ways to get through the perimeter defense. Again, most frequently looking for a vendor vulnerability. We've got a couple of questions that have come up that I'd like to address because they might be on other people's minds. One of the questions is, have we seen any reports related to records being compromised while they were at Iron Mountain? And the answer to that is yes. We have not seen a significant number of claims related to that. So based on our statistics, it would seem that Iron Mountain is does a good job of keeping the records safe, but we have seen some claims. And, remember, as a provider, the patient comes to you and, you're the first party that's responsible for protecting that information. And if you choose, or if there's a need for business necessity to share that information with another party or to give that information to another party like Iron Mountain, you still have liability, and really the primary liability because that patient came to you and entrusted their information with you. We also have another question that's up that says, how would we know if the data has been breached? And this is a great question because the criminals could steal the information and sit on it for a year or two. You know, many of us have had that experience where you open up your bank account statement and you go, whoa, you know, that's not my charge. And I've had that happen. I live in Southern California, and there were some charges that showed up last year for pizza delivery and taxi cab rides in New Jersey, which I had not taken. So someone had probably stolen my information somewhere along the line when I was swiping my card, and then it had been sold to someone, and there's really no way of knowing how that happened. You might find out that your patient's information has been breached because your patients are contacting you, or the police contacts you because they're investigating an event. You might find out that your data's been breached because, you know, you're notified by an employee that a laptop with confidential information was stolen out of their car. You might find out because your administrator realizes months too late that they did not sufficiently restore a firewall when they were doing some work on the network. So it can come up in a variety of different fashions. Now the next question is, boy, these are the questions are coming in fast and furious now. Is the iCloud safe? Well, I can't answer that question. I can tell you that we rely on the cloud for some of the data that we store, but that's only going to be as strong as your your vendor and the perimeter defense that they have. Generally, what we're seeing is that just take a classic medical group. Let's say you need an iCloud provider. You're sending data through your billing company. You know, physicians are sharing information or carrying information around on thumb drive. You know, what is really safe? Well, we're going to get into that with our risk management tips, but we recognize that it's necessary to do all of these things to run an effective practice today. Like, we can't structure the practice based on how do we be 100% tight for a cybersecurity standpoint. We have to structure the practice based on your business needs, then assess how the IT system and the IT process can support your business needs. Regulators are insisting on electronic health records. What do we think about this in comparison to paper records? Do we think this will increase the potential for data theft? Well, sure, because so much data is in one spot, and it's so much easier to carry away that data than it would be to take boxes and boxes of records. So I'm going to move on from the questions and jump back into the presentation for a bit. This slide, when I first saw this, I thought this looks like something out of a television show. You know, it doesn't look real to me. But when you drill down on it, what you see is this is what is on the black market, and it's advertising information that's for sale. And it's out there. Criminals can go online and find it and pay money for it. Let's jump now to the regulatory climate. Gosh, the healthcare industry is so dominated by regulators. And in this case, we look at HIPAA and high tech and we say, friend or foe? Well, I guess it's actually, we just got to live with it because we don't have any choice, right? But here's what we have seen. HIPAA and high tech give some pretty specific information about how to set up, a sound IT process. And if that is followed, you'll see that there's much less likelihood that any significant fines and penalties will be levied, which is good news because the regulators realize that the information that you have is targeted and that the criminals are going after you, So the insurance pays for investigation, the response to the regulators if they come knocking on your door, and then, of course, fines or penalties. But again, the potential for fines or penalties is greatly reduced if there's a good plan in place, and that includes following the guidelines put out by HIPAA and under high tech. Here's here's a little bit more data on the reason why you're a target and what can be done with it. We really see three uses. One is health insurance information is wanted so that criminals can submit phony prescriptions, get the drugs, and resell them on the street. So it's just a more sophisticated version of, earlier ploys to create false prescriptions. Next, we see, as Melvin said, we've got uninsured people. They purchase the information, show up to get health care services, and all of a sudden a person is looking at bills coming through and thinking, that's not me. I didn't have that gallbladder surgery. And lastly, of course, the information can be used to create a fake ID. We like to focus on the low-hanging fruit when it comes to risk management because right at the top of the list, negligence and carelessness stands out as sources of exposure. When you look at this list, you can see that a lot of these things can be prevented if people follow best practices. Lost or stolen laptops or other portable devices. If you're following encryption, you're in good shape. And we're going to see a trend towards two-factor encryption that includes things like either a thumbprint scan or some kind of iris or retina scan. That's where I believe we're going to go when it comes to protecting information that's highly valuable on the dark market. Improper disposal of records, we still find claims coming in where boxes of records were thrown into a dumpster. So really verifying that your vendor, that your or the person in your office that's responsible for disposal of records is working with a reputable disposal company. And rogue employees. Again, I can't stress it enough. Employees that are posing HR issues, they're going to be a vulnerability for you on a number of fronts. Now, a question has just come in about when data is stored by the vendor off-site, how can it be stolen from my office? What extra protections should we take? That's a great question. So if the data is stored by the vendor off-site and your office actually never retains control of that data, you still have legal liability for that data because the patient came to see you and you've outsourced the necessary business function to a third party. So the practice that you can do is to verify by asking them about their cybersecurity, ask them if they're HIPAA compliant. They should be if they're signing a business associate agreement. And then look for indemnification language in the contract, which we're going to also talk about. Regardless of whether or not you're using a third party to store the data, you still have liability exposure. And when we're adjusting claims, we don't wait to see if the vendor is going to step up and do what they contractually obligated themselves to do by indemnifying you or taking care of the problem. We first adjust the claim, and then we deal with the vendor exposure on the other side.
And are you there?
Yes, so this is Melvin again, and as promised earlier, here's a chart that illustrates the cost to respond to a data breach. And getting a handle on the amount of records that you store is a crucial step to managing your risk because the cost to respond to a data breach is directly proportional to the amount of records that are compromised. So based on industry research, expert advice, as well as NAS's own claims data breach response costs are approximately $20 per record. With a clear understanding of the number of records that you store, you can run estimates of the cost to respond to a data breach, which is a very simple calculation. You take the number of records that you have times $20, which will estimate the total cost of responding to a breach. So again, as an example, if you have 10,000 records times $20 per record, you're looking at $200,000, which would include patient notification letters, call center support, and credit monitoring services. And keep in mind that this estimate does not include the costs that come from lawsuits, regulatory fines and penalties, or lost revenues due to damaged reputation. Now, here's a simplified view of how costs of the data breach can be incurred in the event of a breach. In taking a look at the flow of the diagram, going towards the top from left to right, you see that once you have discovered a breach, there are costs associated with evaluating the breach to determine what information has been accessed, and also the steps necessary to comply with the privacy laws. And once that's determined, there may be costs associated with notification as well as credit monitoring. And as a result of the breach, third-party class action claims can be brought by customers or fines and penalties imposed by governmental agencies. Now let's look at the flow going towards the lower right. Not only do you incur actual expenses as a result of the breach, you can have indirect costs, which are harder to determine. PR can mitigate some of this exposure, but you can suffer reputational damage and loss of goodwill because of adverse media coverage. And that could lead to income loss from current customers leaving and potential new customers deciding to go somewhere else. In fact, let's take back the Target example. Target's name was pummeled from their cyber breach. They reported a 46% drop in net profit during the 2013 holiday quarter. So you can see how a cyber breach can affect the company. We've included a number of claims examples, which I always find helpful in showing how policies could be triggered. The first example is a clinic that was hit with a $150,000 HIPAA penalty. An unencrypted thumb drive containing 2,200 records was stolen from a vehicle of a staff member, and the unencrypted thumb drive is the first red flag here. The other red flag is when the OCR opened an investigation, they found that the clinic didn't conduct their due diligence to protect the patient's information and comply with the breach notification requirements. So they had a $150,000 penalty and settlement where they had to invest more money to implement a corrective action plan. This case really emphasizes the importance of having a breach response plan in place and to properly consider what the breach response notification will mandate. Here's another example of a laptop that was stolen. Unfortunately, the laptop was not encrypted. The laptop has not been found, and it could not be determined how many patients were on the computer. So they had to notify all 29,000 patients from the time when their EHR was first implemented. So there's no indication that data has been accessed, but due to the regulatory notification requirements, the entity would incur data response expenses, including affected patients with free credit monitoring. So using our example earlier, we're looking at 29,000 records. Let's round it up to 30,000 records to make it easier. Times $20 per record, you're looking at $600,000 just to respond to the data breach. So there's also an important theme here that when devices are not encrypted, the cost of the breach can get very expensive. Another example that we have here is where 12 people filed a $50 million class action lawsuit due to a stolen face sheets plus digital files that were encrypted. What's interesting about this claim is the fact that a fairly small number of people can file a lawsuit, and you can have quite a significant amount of damages. The suit argues that the hospital was negligent, they breached their fiduciary duty, they also breached its contract and violated HIPAA. One patient actually said that she's already had to deal with a fake tax return using her Social Security number, and others had thousands of dollars stolen due to this breach. Another example involved a university who was negligent that a firewall was disabled for 10 months without knowing it and exposed 17,500 patient information. DHHS hit the university with $400,000 fine for HIPAA security violations, and you'll see a claims trend that the fines and penalties increase when the legal level of negligence rises. And the last example that we have here is where 3 laptops were stolen from a podiatry office. And it basically, the information contained about 6,000 patients. What's interesting about this breach, though, is that they had to post a notification on the website as a compliance requirement. Certainly, this would impact their current as well as potential patients and future earnings.
So, here's our next poll for the audience. When you're evaluating your business's exposure to a potential data breach, do you need to consider, 1, the type of information stored, 2, system protection? Oh my God, everyone beat me to the punch already and got all of the above. Okay, steal my thunder. So yes, all of the above. Type of information stored. That's where we're looking at whether or not it's paper or electronic records, if they're current patient records, their employee records, and also there is, when files are stored, digitized files are stored, there is a demand for the metal that goes into it, and digitized records can be stolen just for the metal. They don't even necessarily want the information. A couple of questions have come up, so I'd like to take a moment and just answer them right now. We've been asked if we can supply a form of a business associate agreement that can be recommended for a private practice, and if we can recommend a confidentiality and HIPAA policy that a small practice can implement. And yes, for all CAP members, that is available through a risk management website that CAP provides to their members. Next question is, we get numerous requests for medical records. If we're not able to find a patient's chart, should we consider it stolen or compromised? What are we required to do thereafter? You know, that's a great question, because obviously if we've got medical charts in a paper format, they will get lost over time, and that's something that we would refer to our risk management team. You know, you're not so worried about one chart in terms of your potential liability. It's going to get very expensive when we have a number of records that are involved, but certainly we can refer that to our risk management team for a specific response. And then another question is, how do we encrypt a device? And that's where you would go to an IT security folks, and they can help you do that. It's not too expensive. It's becoming pretty common today. A question has just popped up as to whether or not we can recommend a trusted IT consulting company in Los Angeles, and I'm going to have to defer that to the folks at CAP, and we can talk about that offline. Next question is, can we get a checklist for the high-tech security requirements? And that is also something that CAP offers to all of their members. And that also includes sample HIPAA policies for the employees to attest to. So let's talk a little bit about some basic security controls. The first is restricting user installation of applications. So just put in really, basic terms, we don't want to let our employees put whatever apps they want on our network. That's really important. I'll tell you a funny story. When MySpace used to be the big thing with the 20-something crowd at a company that I worked at a few years ago, our administrator set it up so if you went on MySpace, you would be locked out. And the message that would come up on your screen if you tried to log into MySpace said, God won't let you go here. So that was how that business owner chose to deal with it. So, really, we don't want our employees to be surfing the Internet and downloading apps and, bringing all kinds of potential viruses and other things that can slow down the system. Patches and software updates. This is a huge issue right now. Microsoft is actually kind of leading the way in terms of the trends of the vendors. Right now, they're basically saying if you're not keeping up with our operating system changes, you might not receive the patches. So that's a heavy carrot and stick approach to keep up with both the operating system changes, i.e. upgrade your system so that you can get the current patches. Another thing that's an issue is the administrative privileges. And with your organization, you want to be really close-knit in terms of who has administrative credentials. So there should be one person in the organization who has the highest level of administrator credentials. And even that person, when they're just using the network for their day-to-day work, they would use a different logon. So we want to have very narrow access to the administrator ability to actually change the network. There are a couple of questions that have come up. Let me see if I can run through a few of these now. When patients leave the practice, should we delete their data, for example, store them on a CD in a locked drawer? Well, you definitely have to save the patient data according to the state statute. If it's a minor, there's quite a number of years that you need to be saving that data. So there is information on the CAP risk management website about some best practices in this area. How can you determine if your firewalls are sufficient? How do you know if you've been hacked or a victim of malware? The most expensive way to determine if your firewalls are sufficient is to hire an expert to come in and do intrusion detection. I can tell you from all of the cyber applications that we see, that's not a very common practice. What we're seeing as more common, that organizations are buying the highest level of antivirus protection that they have available, and they're making sure that their firewalls and the software that they use is current. So you might bring in an IT consultant. If your organization doesn't have IT staff on payroll, you bring in an IT consultant to help you assess that. HIPAA screening done. Okay, you definitely need policies and procedures for HIPAA. And again, the CAP members website, you can download policies and procedures in Word format. You can insert your corporate logo, and there you have ready and available your own HIPAA policy. And you can distribute that to employees and have them sign to state that they've received it. I'm going to talk a little bit now about the coverage that's available to all CAP members, because this is going to give you an idea of what types of claims you want to be reporting. The first is the crisis management expenses and the breach response. So this is where we bring in the professionals to help manage the incident. We bring in legal, forensic, and public relations experts. One interesting little wrinkle on the legal front is that you have a couple of different laws that you have to take into consideration. You have federal law, HIPAA high-tech, you have California state law, and if you're treating patients that don't reside in California, then the law that governs their home state has to be considered as well. So it's a complicated process. You also might need forensic support to investigate the potential of a breach and find out that actually very few or no number of records were compromised. But the insurance is still triggered if there's a potential event, and the forensic expenses will come into play because you want people to go in there and evaluate what happened. We have customer notification expenses and customer support expenses. These are mandated by law. This is what I consider a cost of doing business. You have no choice in the matter, and this is something that your insurance coverage picks up. Security and privacy liability, this is the coverage that responds if you're actually sued. And we aren't seeing a lot of lawsuits against medical groups at this time. The most common lawsuit that we see relates to before and after pictures that might be on a website that are not properly scrubbed so that the person's identity actually can be ascertained. So that's the most common type of lawsuit. But by and large, if things are handled well at the breach stage where, the notification requirements are met, people have been advised that they are going to receive credit monitoring, usually things do not morph into a lawsuit. They could still include a regulatory action. The regulators might come knocking on your door and request records. The policy responds to that as well. UCLA notably has had some significant regulatory investigations for some of their infamous breaches. Cyber terrorism coverage, this covers the practice if there's a loss of income due to an attack on the network that's motivated from some ideological or political reason. Like if your network is taken down entirely, you lose income. Cyber extortion actually is more common than you would think. It ranges from the sort of garden variety crypto locker where there's a virus that's now locking people out of your network, and the criminals are demanding a relatively small amount of money. Maybe they only want $500, and they are pretty confident that someone's going to pay the $500 to get access. The problem with that is that they don't necessarily give you the access. You have no guarantee when you pay the money that you're going to actually be able to get back into your network immediately as quote-unquote promised. So that's a claim that we would respond to. Multimedia, this is really broad. This is broader than just cyber coverage. This could include, for example, let's say you just did a rebranding campaign and you've inadvertently used a logo of a competitor practice or even a practice that you're not competing directly with, but they find out about it and they bring a lawsuit against you for infringement. That's covered. And lastly, there's coverage for network asset protection. This has two features. One is loss of income, and the other is reimbursement for costs to replace the data. So if your network is brought down and you have to replace the data, let's say it's not readily available from the cloud or from backup tapes or what have you, if you have to actually replace the data, this coverage would come into play. When we're considering the cost, let's just use an example of a group that has 20,000 records. So we have the number that Melvin gave us earlier where we can estimate about $20 per record. That would respond to what I call the mandatory costs. You have to notify the patients. You don't have any choice in the matter. Otherwise, you're in violation of federal and state law. So what do we see in addition to that? You've got to consult with an attorney. IT forensics. Again, IT forensics can be extensive even if we ultimately determine that a breach has not occurred. Patient notification, patient call support, this is important. Credit monitoring. It's interesting. Most individuals do not take you up on credit monitoring, but of course we still offer it. I think a lot of us have become kind of immune to it because we've had our information breached so many times. We're like, okay, here we go again, whether it's my university or a credit card, my bank. And then the public relations costs. We had a client where there was an employee that was arrested. The employee had been able to wheedle their way into the confidence of patients. This was in a residential facility, and get access to having check signing authority on their account. And actually what it turned out is that the employee was getting the money and going out and gambling. So they weren't stealing the information to resell on the black market. But we needed to hire public relations because at the time of the person's arrest, we didn't know the extent of the damage that they might have done. So the public relations team is in place, crafts the message, making sure that all the phone calls that come in are directed to the right party and everyone stays on point to help minimize any potential damage. Now, we've got another question for the audience. Which of the following are important risk management steps? One would be to assign one person to be ultimately responsible for privacy and data security. The next would be to have a plan to address data security incidents. Third is determine where the PHI or PAI is stored. Fourth is conduct a risk assessment. Fifth, control vendors and business partners. Sixth, continuous workforce training. Seventh, an annual update on company policies regarding privacy and compliance, or all the above. Oh, 100% again. I've got to make my questions a little more complicated next time. So we're really in an arena where common sense has to prevail.
So let's move on to the risk management that's available to you. As part of the program offering, CAP has extended your members' benefits offering by giving you access to a cyber risk management website. And as a CAP member, what you do is log on to the CAP website as you normally would, and there would be a link there to access the website through your members-only portal. This is not available for public use. It is only available for members only. The website provides risk management tools and resources that help mitigate a breach, and there's also compliance materials that are state-specific. So they provide quick tips and up-to-date rules and regulations by state. There's also templates that are available to help you implement privacy policies and breach response procedures. And one thing I do want to mention is that when a company is being audited or reviewed, and if there's a regulatory agency that goes in, especially, for instance, DHHS, the first thing they're going to do is to look for an incident response plan in your office. There is an incident response plan housed under your risk management website that you can take advantage of. As part of basically, and there's also under the risk management website, there's also sample templates. And I know that some of these questions came up earlier regarding vendor agreements, business associate agreements. There's also a remote access agreement that's available in Word. So you can modify and customize these forms as needed. So, for example, if you're outsourcing your services for instance, IT needs, and someone from India or China needs to access your computer to troubleshoot whatever issue it is that you're having, you'll definitely want to make sure that you have a remote access agreement form in place in order to make sure that they are protected. So it's important to have that form signed and executed, which are all available in your risk management website. There's also training modules and programs for your staff that's available on the website. It's training modules as basic as what is encryption, is password a good password. So these are all training modules that you can definitely take advantage of using the risk management site. The risk management tools available to you actually takes away some of the burden that you have, that you may have to pay extra expenses for outside counsel, but now you don't have to because of the fact that there's templates and tools that's available to you at your fingertips. I'll turn it over to Chris to discuss some of the compliance basics, and she'll also be wrapping up the rest of the presentation.
Thanks, Mel. Here are the basics. First, we want to have one person that is held accountable for privacy and data security responsibility. And with this accountability, we want to give that person focus. I know that your administrators and are just pulled in a zillion directions, but there needs to be one person who's taking that on. The next step is to prepare for data security incidents. This means you want to have a backup plan if the network goes down. How are we going to restore our information? Critical. And you want to notify CAP immediately of this event so that you can get the protection under the insurance, and also you can get the resources that the insurance brings to you. We want to determine where the personal information is stored. Is it on the network? Are there backup tapes? Where are they? Are they secure? Are they in a locked room? We're using the cloud, information downloaded onto portable devices or laptops. Are there paper files? Who has remote access? Are you using IT security folks that are coming in remotely? Certainly your billing company might be. Consider who can download files. Conduct your risk assessment. After you've identified where the information is, what are our areas of greatest vulnerability? And let's look at those first. We're going to cover a lot of vulnerability by three basic steps. One is encryption for portable devices. And when you're trying to assess what to do from an encryption standpoint, there's a lot of information readily available through IT security folks, and it's not so expensive these days. HIPAA compliance training, again, CAP's made it super easy because CAP is giving you access to this risk management website where you can download the forms. And then patch management, making sure that who's ever in charge of your network is routinely checking for patches, downloading them, and keeping the network current. Another step is to control your vendors and your business partners. We want to look at the contracts for indemnification. Again, that doesn't take the place of insurance because the insurance really is, and the resources provided by your insurance carrier are going to be your first stop to look for support for the public relations experts, the legal experts, and the IT experts to investigate the breach. But if the responsibility really does lie in the hand of your vendor, you could look to them for indemnification. And then whatever losses are associated with your loss, on your loss history, they would be offset by indemnification from those from those parties. Again, control access, password management is really important, and that includes, of course, with your vendors. You can ask your vendors if they are looking closely at protecting the passwords. See if that rings a bell when you speak to them. Every vendor that you have that you're giving data to should immediately tell you that that's done. It shouldn't even be a question. There shouldn't be a moment of hesitation on their part. You want to implement a continuous workforce training and awareness program. You want to include all your staff. And, it's tough, but the real world is when we have a lot of staff that are making minimum wage or not much more than minimum wage, you never know when someone might run into tough financial times and be in a situation where they might sell information. I mean, we've seen it happen. So that regular training, that constant reminder, it really is a good thing to do. As Mel showed you, our risk management website has tools. We've got tips and best practices. We have simple steps that can be done now, and there's policies to download. So we encourage everyone to take advantage of those as soon as possible. When we're looking at responding to an event, immediate response is really important. Now, that doesn't mean that we jump the gun. It means that you notify CAP, and CAP brings the insurance company to the table with our resources, and then we evaluate what happened. We, deliberately consider what the correct next steps are to protect your reputation and to protect your patients. We verify that we're going to comply with all of the federal and state laws that might be implicated. And then we get a proper response. If we go back to our first slide, it was that mishandling a data breach event is really the issue. That's really where we have a problem. So if you take these steps, you're in a much better position to protect yourself and your patients. So in summary, you want to be proactive. We've talked a lot about protecting your practice, and of course we want to protect your patients. We want to have training, and between the proactive steps and the training, they're going to be a defense for you. If the government does come and investigate, having taken those steps, you're going to be in a better position to mitigate any potential fines or penalties. And you're going to be in a better position to prevent the event from happening in the first place. And then lastly, please do notify CAP immediately in the event that there's a breach so that the breach response management can come into play. We've got some questions that have come in, and I'm going to take a moment to go through them. Question about looking for credentials or certifications to look for to confirm that a consultant has competency. That's a great question. I would have to actually go research and give you the exact credential information. So I think one thing that you can ask them is who their other customers are, see if they have handled sophisticated healthcare exposures, and contact those customers and ask them what their experience has been. You certainly want to verify that they have some recent training in HIPAA and high-tech compliance, and you don't want to hire someone who's just informed themselves by reading information on the internet. Here's a question that came up. My electronic health record system is web-based. I am sure they have double-layer security. Do I have to worry about breaches? Well, your employees have access to that electronic health record system. So your employees still are in a position where they could download information possibly or compromise it in some way. So when you're evaluating your risk, you want to think about both the vendor and also the vulnerability on the employee front. You'd have to know more about your electronic health record system to know what can be downloaded and how readily accessible that is. A question came up about where we would find a public relations expert if an event occurs. And we have a panel of experts that we work with, so we've developed that over time. So there's some other questions that I see that have come in, and I want to turn it over to the CAP folks to respond to those in just a moment. But are there any other questions for Melvin and I?
And we invite you to type those into the chat tab on the left side of your screen. Type it in the box below, and then either click the send button or hit enter. And we do have time to address your questions, so go ahead and take advantage of this opportunity.
Okay, so at this time we're going to, the questions that have come in that relate to specifics about the CAP website and what CAP recommends in terms of coverage, CAP will be responding to those separately. Another question has come in about eFax, and boy, we do see claims come in where patient information is faxed to the wrong party, but typically those are not expensive claims, but there are, there's certainly exposure related to that. Another question that's come in, if they've signed a business associate agreement with an outside vendor, is the physician or the group still responsible? And the answer to that is yes. I like to think about it similar to having my own personal tax returns prepared. I can use an outside party to help me prepare the returns, but the liability still rests with me. So anytime we share our information with a third party, we're making a conscious decision to potentially put the patient information at risk. And the business associate agreement is good. It's better than not having one, as is an indemnification agreement, but it doesn't eliminate the physician or the medical group's responsibility.
Okay, and we'll give it just a few more seconds if you do have a question to type it into the chat tab. And we do have a couple coming in right now.
So one of the questions that has come up is related to a group that's part of a large integrated delivery systems network, and they're asking if they have to worry about a data breach if all of their staff logs out as soon as they finish charting. Well, from what we see, human error is the source of a lot of claims. So if indeed all of our employees follow the rules and logged out as soon as they were supposed to and such, that's definitely going to minimize your exposure. But we don't always see that the employees remember to follow the rules 100%. And of course, as I've said before, you can have disgruntled employees. So, employees that are an HR issue, they're there, and they're posing a threat on multiple fronts. There was a large healthcare system in Los Angeles that had an employee that systematically stole records related to the filing of work comp claims. And they took those records home. This was when paper records were common. And that employee was terminated for reasons unrelated to this event. And then the police were investigating that person for another matter, and they found these boxes of paper records at the employee's home. So, our employees are definitely an area of vulnerability. And, insurance generally, insurance is really, it's sleep at night protection, it's balance sheet protection. So, the folks at the CAP agency can work with you to evaluate what your comfort level is in terms of your exposure and your insurance protection that you feel is right for you. There's a question about the immunization registry and a requirement to report all immunizations into the registry and whether or not that poses an exposure. Well, if you are entering in an individual's name, and their address, their date of birth, and their health history such that that information could identify the person and potentially compromise that person. And the classic scenario is, would I want my employer to know if I had cancer or if I had AIDS or someone's applying for a job? Would they want that information to be readily available? So you could be compromised, but if it's just a record of immunizations, that's not necessarily information that could be used to harm the individual. Another question is, if all of our information is through a cloud computing solution like Google Apps for work, do we need to make sure our employees use encrypted computers? Well, one of the things that I would say is it depends upon where people keep their passwords. We're back into that realm of, how much password control do you have? So we have to go back and verify under HIPAA and high tech if that would be considered acceptable. Let's see. That really sums up the questions that we've received so far.
Okay, and with that, since we've exhausted all the questions, any closing thoughts you might have for us today?
I would just like to help assure people to know that there are steps that you can take, and with the resources that CAP's made available to you, it's actually, much easier than one might think. It's just a deliberate, thoughtful process that has to be gone through and then updated annually, and it's excellent protection.
All right. And with that, I want to thank both of you for a very informative presentation today. That concludes today's CAP webinar, Data Breach. It can happen to you. The Cooperative of American Physicians will email the webinar recording and the presentation slides as soon as both are available online. Any questions that have not been answered during today's Q&A session will be answered offline and emailed to all attendees within the next few weeks. Now, in just a few moments, your computer will be redirected to an online evaluation for today's seminar. We ask that you please take a few moments to share your thoughts with us. Today's program is copyrighted in 2015 by the Cooperative of American Physicians, all rights reserved.